Greetings, citizens, and thanks for tuning in to Nindie Nation. It's the end of the year, which means our usual weekly fire hose of promising new indie games has slowed to a drip, and the Nintendo Switch eShop has returned to the barren wasteland of shovelware. But never fear, citizens, because Ol' Uncle Nindie is here to help fill that void with some quality games that just barely missed our top 10 list of 2023. So before January arrives and we're talking about the 10 best indie games of 2023, let's take a moment to reflect on a few that could keep your Joy-Cons synced as we round out the year. Click like and subscribe if you love discovering great new indie games, and tell me down in the comments what your hidden gems were from this past year. Now get your wish lists ready because the end of the year sales are right around the corner, so let's take a look at 5 great Nindies from 2023 that you may have missed. After almost ignoring it based on genre and artwork alone, I was pleasantly surprised when I realized that Never Awake would be among my favorite games of this year. Kicking off the year in January, Never Awake by developer Neotro combines a shoot-'em-up with spooky horror themes, both of which are things I usually stay away from. Now don't get me wrong, plenty of shmups have fallen into my good graces as we recently discussed with Skyforce Reloaded, but Never Awake is quite different. The game takes place inside the nightmares of a little girl named Rem.
Get it? Like REM, R-E-M, rapid eye movement? Anyone?
So instead of shooting down spaceships or demons, you're destroying the things that represent Rem's greatest fears. Utensils found at the dentist's office, the bullies at school, and even vegetables are all enemies you'll face, and each enemy is presented as an oil-painted, nightmarish monstrosity that are both unsettling and truly unique. Rem is in a coma, so between worlds, the story is presented as a mix of the conversations she can hear subconsciously and her own internal monologues as she recounts why she's scared of the things that she is. As a 2.5D shoot-'em-up, you'll often scroll in multiple directions throughout the 80 or so levels. Each level has multiple objectives beyond just reaching the end, like avoiding certain items, defeating a certain type or number of enemies, or just reaching the end while affected by some sort of debuff. But it's the level structure that really won me over. Each world has about a dozen levels, with your goal being to ultimately reach its hideous boss. But inside each level, you'll find about 30 to 60 seconds of content with a warp at the end that causes the nightmare itself to loop. When you're revisiting levels to complete additional objectives, you'll run up against challenges like shooting down every enemy before the start of Loop 3 or avoiding damage in Loop 2, but my favorites are when you have to, for example, defeat every enemy in the first loop while also reaching the warp point within a very strict time limit. The reason it's fun is because of the equipment and RPG systems throughout. There's over 40 different abilities that you can mix and match between 5 different slots that impact your weapons, defenses, magic or special attacks, and the way enemies react to you. Sometimes you'll be a glass cannon that defeats every enemy on screen but dies with one hit, and sometimes you'll turn into a flying turret with homing missiles that barely moves fast enough to navigate through the level. And because every piece of equipment has its own leveling system, you're encouraged to constantly switch things up among hundreds of available loadouts. It's because of this system that the game can really be as easy or as tough as you want, but you're encouraged to tackle the tougher objectives as they bring much better rewards. I was really surprised by this game and spent well over 20 hours with it, which is crazy considering that essentially happened through minute-long challenges one at a time. It's just got an excellent gameplay loop that constantly rewards changing things up. Never Awake released for $25, which is pretty pricey given its genre, but it has seen a few 25% discounts so far, and hopefully now you can see why I think it's worth it, even at full price. But if you're on the fence like I was, and maybe this video convinced you to pick it up, you can throw it on your wish list for the next time it goes on sale. Solo developer Blobfish is probably best known for Brotato, as it was featured in an Indie World presentation earlier this year. But that's not what we're talking about today. Before we get to his other game you should check out, if you are at all interested in the business and logistics of indie games, I'll link his website down in the description, because after launching his first game, Lost Potato, on Steam in 2020, he chronicled not only the development process, but also how the game performed and how much money he made on it. It's really interesting stuff that hopefully encourages you to buy more indie games. Anyways, we're not talking about Lost Potato, his first game, or Brotato, his most recent. Rather, it's the game in the middle that I think snuck past a lot of players this year, and Space Gladiators is far better of a game than it looks at first blush. Using this, Cartoon Network meets Flash animation art style, there's a lot of visual resemblance to The Binding of Isaac, as everything is, squishy and just kinda generally gross looking. But the comparisons don't stop there, because Space Gladiators also happens to be a very traditional roguelite. That's roguelite with a T, because while you get randomly generated worlds and a different character in every run, some of the currency you collect can be applied to permanent upgrades, and persistent progression between runs is what differentiates a roguelike versus a roguelite. You with me? Space Gladiators does differ from Brotato, though, in its gameplay, as instead of a top-down Vampire Survivors-like, it's a side-scrolling action platformer that plays in a similar fashion to a Metroid, Castlevania, or Dead Cells. You start on the left side of the map and have to reach the boss room on the right side, but how you get there is up to you, in which of the top, middle, or bottom lanes you take. Those lanes can lead to treasures, gear, healing, or shops, but most of the time you'll either be dropped into a combat or platforming level. Combat could be a large room to explore with a couple of enemies strewn about, or it could be an arena of sorts with waves of enemies to defeat. And with the platform rooms, they can either be a series of tricky jumps over spikes, or any number of trap-laden gauntlets with lasers to avoid and other stuff like that. The game doesn't do anything vastly original, but it feels really good to play, and the variety of characters, weapons, and abilities really let you focus on which aspects of the game you enjoy most. And as it released the same day as Tears of the Kingdom,
Not the smartest business decision, by the way.
I found it to be an excellent little palate cleanser in between hours of open-ended Zelda sessions. Space Gladiators released for $14.99, which is a little high in my opinion, but it's gone on sale for $12 a few times, and once it drops to $10, I'll really start recommending it more. But as I mentioned, game development is tough and the money is scarce, so if this is the kind of game you're looking for, and you've got the money or gold coins to spare, I think many of you will find a lot to like in Space Gladiators. And while our next game is also a roguelite, it's much more of just an arcade twin-stick shooter. And the gameplay feels so good, I suspect it could convert a few of you who may not be the biggest fans of rogue elements. Lone Ruin was the first game in 2023 that I thought had potential to wind up on my Game of the Year list. Granted, it released during the second week of January, but even then it just barely missed our top 10, and it's better now than it was when I first recommended it. Taking place in a dark, corrupted world where magic has turned the enlightened into monsters, the setup is pretty simple. You move through a sprawling tower, defeating wave after wave of enemies, and the gameplay feels so good, I find it hard to believe that any fan of twin-stick shooters or fast-paced arcade games in general wouldn't have a great time. You start by picking a difficulty and game mode, which boils down to survival, just an endless horde of progressively tougher enemies, or Run, which is a trek through 3 worlds, each with its own boss. Once inside your mode of choice, you'll pick your primary spell from a list of 7 exceptionally diverse weapons, like a long-range sniper laser, a short-range explosion, flamethrowers, grenades you can lob and detonate at will, a sword you can throw like a boomerang, and my personal favorite, the medium-range assault rifle that shoots short bursts of magical bullets. From there, you'll really get into the meat of what makes Lone Ruin special. It really is an arcade game, and I say that for 2 reasons. 1, the levels are quick and intense, with you dashing around, picking off enemies, and making constant upgrade decisions almost every single minute. And 2, because if you play the primary Run mode, you can roll credits in less than 30 minutes. That brings me to the primary reason this game is even better now than it was at launch though. Cuddle Monster, the Swedish developer behind Lone Ruin, received constant feedback that while players enjoyed the action, vibes, and sheer variety of builds you can unlock, they wanted something a bit more akin to the traditional roguelike. And you know what? He listened. Back in May, 5 months after launch, the Fool's Errand update was released and practically delivered the game's sequel. The list of tweaks to performance and balance alongside a boatload of new equipment, enemies, and upgrades are palpable, but the new mode named after the update delivered exactly what critics felt the game was missing. In addition to Survival and Run, you can now select Fool's Errand, which reworks the game into a tower you'll ascend that combines every bit of the available content into one experience. Plus, the difficulty options were removed in favor of one of the best dynamic difficulties I've seen in a long time. I seriously don't know how Cuddle Monster made it so tight, but the game seems to do everything in its power to keep you playing as long as possible while simultaneously delivering a level of tension that feels exciting and natural. By now, you can probably tell if this game's for you, but if you're on the fence, give it a shot. Thankfully, the $15 list price is frequently discounted, so finding it for $5 or $10 shouldn't be an issue at all. It's a fitting price, being an impulse buy territory, because Lone Ruin's mix of fast-paced, tactile gameplay and exhaustive array of how you can actually experience it makes it perfect for when you just need some good old arcade action and something's gotta feed that impulse. But if you're feeling a bit saucy and need to scratch an itch that's equal parts nostalgic, modern, and flamboyant, I'm willing to bet that Fashion Police Squad delivers something you may not have seen before. While the team at Mopeful Games started with a template that's reminiscent of 90s era first-person shooters, I think someone may have spiked the punch bowl at their Finnish headquarters because this game is something else. If you can't tell, this first-person shooter borrows heavily from the design of games like Duke Nukem 3D, with sprawling environments that favor all kinds of elevation and first-person platforming. Generally speaking, the game is all about taking the piss out of overly serious shooters, as well as advertising and the corporate nature of gaming as a whole. You and your squad will roam the streets searching for people who have been forced to wear unfashionable attire, and then you'll save them from their faux pas by, well, usually just shooting them. But then they look fancy and thank you. So big picture, you drop into a level and have to clear out the various waypoints, which are typically the aforementioned unfashionables. However, every level's got a bunch of surprises to throw at you. Sometimes you'll navigate obstacle courses, or tackle mini-bosses, or search through buildings to defeat enemies, or find some kind of trinket that you need to beat the level. And a lot of times, the structure is a callback to 90s shooters, where you need to find the red key to open the red door, so you can find the yellow key that opens the yellow door, and so on and so on. One of my favorite parts of the game, though, is when you get a grappling hook, because now, tell me in the comments if I'm forgetting something, but I think the belt/grappling hook in Fashion Police Squad is one of the most fun I've ever had the joy of using. It can work like a zipline, pulling you to faraway places, or you can use it like a whip to swing from posts as you vault yourself across a stage without touching the trap-laden ground. And just like the rest of the game, you move at a crazy fast clip, but since the belt is designed so well, you almost never miss a grapple point. Speaking of whips, the weapons are a riot too. You get your typical shotguns and machine guns and all of that, and then you get a variety of laser-type weapons that are used to turn the bad guys into fashionistas after wearing down their initial shield. So most enemies are a combination of shooting to stun them, then switching weapons to make them fashionable. All in all, Fashion Police Squad is just fun, and it's a lot of fun. If you haven't paid attention to the background music, the game also has one of the best soundtracks of 2023. It goes hard, and it never stops. With about 5 hours to complete the story, and a few more to see everything it's got, it's a fast-paced, quick affair that doesn't really have any slower parts. It's just all fun from start to finish. Fashion Police Squad's list price is $20, but it constantly drops to $15, which I think is a great price for what you get here. The game will crack you up with its writing and premise, and the gameplay is constantly changing things up so it never gets stale. For a fun time that'll last you a few days, Fashion Police Squad absolutely delivers. And last up on today's list of games that you may have missed in 2023 is one that I have been playing for over 2 years on PC via Early Access, and the sequel to one of my favorite homages to Mega Man. 30XX is a natural evolution for Battery Staples' original outing, 20XX, which came to the Switch all the way back in 2018. And as the name implies, these games lean much more into the Mega Man X series than they do the classic formula. The developer knows that not everyone loves roguelikes, so right from the jump, you can play through 30XX in a classic format, working through 8 levels, defeating the bosses, earning their powers, and then tackling a multi-staged in-game area. In that aspect alone, if you wish there were more games that carried the legacy of Mega Man X, you'll find exactly what you're looking for in this mode alone, and there's so many ways to modify the challenge or change things up further that this alone should probably justify the $20 asking price. However, just like its predecessor, 30XX is built around the idea of an infinitely replayable game thanks to a slew of roguelike mechanics and RPG elements that are cleverly woven into the game's flow. Even within the roguelike mode, you can choose to play with permadeath, where you have a set number of lives, or play the roguelite mode that makes it play almost like a Mega Man X RPG. You get permanent stats to tinker with, in addition to literally thousands of combinations for weaponry and locomotion. You want to triple jump with air dashes and a glide on the way down? Yeah, you can do that. Want to combine your boomerang weapon with a lightning rod so you deal screen-clearing damage without using energy? Yeah, you can do that too. The upgrade system is very smart, as you have multiple stats that play off of each other based on available slots and a couple of types of energy. It does a pretty good job of not letting you become an invincible wrecking shop, but the potential is definitely there, especially once you've maxed out all your stats. The levels themselves are typical fare, large with branching paths, but if I had one complaint about the game, I'd say that for how many elements can combine to create each level, they do tend to start feeling the same after you've been through them a couple times. Even when they do feel samey though, each level has multiple side objectives, like platforming challenges, enemy gauntlets, and wager rooms where you place a bet on your performance and receive a different type of upgrade depending on how you do. So even when they do feel similar, there's still a lot of variety. The team really threw every idea they had into this game, and they just keep coming as recently as the big 1.1 update that rolled out in late December as I'm recording this. The bosses, though, as they should be, are easily my favorite part, because they really put your build to the test. The traditional 1v1 battles are usually mid-stage challenges, with the good stuff waiting at the end. Bosses will mess with gravity, they'll change the weather, they'll have multiple components that must be defeated separately, and all of them are super unique. And then of course the best part is that if you're being attacked by a really cool and dangerous weapon, chances are you can probably get that weapon for yourself. I think 30XX is outstanding and delivers on everything it sets out to do, but I will give one warning. If you've already played the mess out of 20XX, you're gonna find an expansion or more of the same here versus something entirely new. With that said, I'd be surprised if we actually got a sequel to 30XX, because between the modes, characters, online options, co-op, daily challenges, weekly challenges, and even the ability to play community-built levels from the PC-exclusive level editor, all give 30XX a virtually endless amount of Mega Man X-style content I'm sure any fan of 2D action will love. So, anything on today's list that tickles your fancy? Anything here you've already played? Did we miss any hidden gems that you think deserve more attention? Head down to the comments or swing by our Discord to keep the Nindie conversation going. While we round out the year with a few one-off videos like this, if you like indie games, be sure to subscribe so you can catch our regular weekly episodes covering the best new Nintendo Switch indie games each and every Wednesday, because we'll be right back at it with episode 201 in the first week of January. Until then, citizens, I'm Jeff. This has been another Nindie Nation video, and remember, no matter what type of game you're looking for, Nindie Nation will be right here to help you find. just the thing to keep your Joy-Cons synced.